Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Now, I've been asked to talk on the topic of urban security in the 21st century. It's a rather broad topic, so I'll have to be somewhat selective in what I cover. Some of the key trends and drivers in urbanization, just to emphasize why urban security is becoming increasingly important, particularly in Asia. I'll then go look at the relationship between urban security, planning and resilience, before looking at the range of threats facing cities today and then thinking about some of the possible ways forward. Just before I begin, I wanted to introduce myself and the organisation I work for. As you've already heard, I'm Dr. Twort from the Royal United Services Institute in London, probably better known to some of you as RUSI. We're the oldest defence and security think tank in the world and a global research leader in our field. As you can see from the slide, we were founded in 1831 by the Duke of Wellington to inform, influence and enhance public debate on a safer and more stable world. Urban security will take on increasing importance in the 21st century as the world's populations become more and more concentrated in urban settlements. Now, urbanisation is not a new phenomenon, but both the rate at which the world is urbanising and the particular countries and regions in which urbanisation will be focused are new. To give you an idea of scale, the UN estimates that the percentage of the world's populations living in urban areas will reach 70% in 2050, up from 55% in 2018. This amounts to urban population growth of 77 million people each year. To put it in context, it's nearly double the rate seen over the second half of the 20th century and nearly 4 times the entire population of Sri Lanka every year. As this happens, megacities, in other words, cities with populations of more than 10 million, will proliferate. And many, perhaps even most of these, will be located in developing countries. Asia and Africa will account for almost all of urban population growth in 2050, approximately 87% in total. And by that point, 60% of people in Asia will be living in cities, or 3.5 billion people. The 21st century is often described as the century of the city and the urban century. Here's some context. It's said that especially after 9/11, the critical roles of cities were revealed as key strategic sites of military, economic, cultural and representational struggle. Now, none of this is to say that urbanisation is a bad thing. Cities account for more than 80% of the world's GDP. And when urbanisation is planned and properly managed, it can lead to rapid economic growth and development. However, rapid urbanisation inevitably creates significant challenges around planning, resilience, poverty, crime and extremism, particularly in developing countries or fragile states, where governments may struggle to keep up with the pace of change. Now, I've got a few bubble charts I want to put up quickly just to visualise the scale of the challenge of urban population growth. This is from the UNICEF website. If we look at urban population in 1950, you can see the bubbles represent the size of the urban population, and the colours show the percentage of total population that is urban. So purple represents greater than 75% urban, yellow between 50 to 75%. This is in 1950. If we move forward 50 years to the year 2000, and then the projected growth for the year 2050. And you can see the scale. Now, although urbanisation can play a role in eradicating poverty, it can also, if poorly managed, lead to the proliferation of slums, social exclusion and disparity, and actually increase poverty. And that in turn can lead to higher rates of crime and violence and present potential health risks. In fact, a lot of urban population growth today is not taking place within the formal city, but rather in slums and informal settlements. So urbanisation really is a double-edged sword, which in some contexts is a driver of development, progress and well-being, and in others is a risk to security and stability. If we look at some of the drivers or factors contributing to urbanisation, we see general population growth. So while some cities in North America and Western Europe are shrinking in size, it's expected to grow by 2.7 billion globally by 2050, with less developed countries accounting for almost all of this growth. If you look at this pie chart, this is the amount of urban population growth projected to 2050, being 2.7 billion. Asia accounts for 50% of that growth, Africa the next biggest at 37%. Another factor affecting urbanisation, the rural to urban migration. Pull factors include a search for economic or social gain, while push factors include escape from conflict and natural disasters. Ineffectual and inefficient local planning and policy implementation can lead to migrants being blamed for poor infrastructure, lack of housing, and lack of basic social provision. As you can see from the chart, urban population rises while rural stagnates and slowly declines. The security challenges and risks generated by population growth in the context of poor urban planning and management can be dramatically increased by geographical location, intercity migration, dependence on complex systems, and level and governance of resilience. So what is urban security? What are we talking about? This diagram shows the complexity of urban security, which must also incorporate urban planning and urban resilience along a spectrum of risks from the day-to-day to disaster management, including low probability, high impact events. This has developed along with a shift at the bottom of the diagram in notions of national security, away from military security towards human security. The concept of urban resilience has a role to play here. When we're faced with a threat, how do we respond? What is the end goal? Resilience can be understood in a number of ways. 3 of them are to withstand and endure, an engineering term where a property retains its original form and bounces back after being subjected to temporary stress. Or you can learn and adapt, an ecological term, the ability of systems to absorb changes of state variables and persist. This can be described as adaptive capacity. And thirdly, transformational change. Infrastructure functions evolve at system level to meet rapidly changing urban needs. But to think of resilience in terms of infrastructure alone can be short-sighted. Think of the rise and fall of cities. London has existed for over 2,000 years and continues to prosper despite war, plague, social upheaval, and fire. There is a need to think of resilience as having an inbuilt capacity to evolve in the face of forces of change. Resilience measures and government interventions cannot protect the civilian population from every eventuality. So the question becomes, what is practical and what is possible? So what are the range of threats? Urban security encapsulates a variety of security challenges from natural hazards, including wildfire, flooding and landslides, urban violence, including open armed conflict, endemic community violence, organised or anomic crime, all the way through to human-induced threats, and that can be toxic waste or industrial pollution, some of which will be more prevalent in certain contexts. Thus, urban security must not only consider anti-crime measures, it must also consider urban development, sustainability and resilience. This holistic approach is essential to ensure public safety and to ensure the population's confidence in the governance structures. We could perhaps use Sri Lanka as an example. Here we see the hazard profile: floods, landslides, drought, coastal erosion. Evidence in 2018 and 2017 affected a number of districts, a number of casualties, and even more people displaced with health risks. Between the years 2007 and 2011, government expenditure on food aid and relief supporting expenses due to natural disasters exceeded 1.7 billion. Industrial activity was also disrupted with factories hit. If we look at Colombo specifically, climate change, along with rapid economic growth and disorganised land use and reclamation, has increased the flood risk in Colombo. The vulnerability to flooding is intensified by climate change, and maybe in some cases by old or poorly maintained drainage systems. This has been recognised with the need for improvement and improved resilience through programmes such as the Metro COLOMBO Urban Development Project of the World Bank. Natural hazards also have economic implications. A 2018 study investigating whether climate change is impacting on the rate at which countries can borrow from international debt capital markets demonstrates that Sri Lanka has been hit by economic losses equivalent to 0.2% of its GDP over a 20-year period due to natural disasters. Meanwhile, the Institute of Policy Studies has said that the cost of natural disasters on Sri Lanka's economy amounted to 1% of GDP in 2017 alone. However, important steps are being taken to implement Sri Lanka's urban vision. A recognised need to improve resilience and social preparedness and to capture lessons learned. So what are some of the lessons that can be identified? Infrastructure and coordinated planning are essential, not only to ensure cities develop efficiently and effectively, but also to ensure they're resilient when faced with shock and crises. For instance, rigorous implementation of building codes can dramatically reduce the number of buildings that collapse during earthquakes, and so reduce the number of casualties. Other lessons have been learned from disasters, such as the benefits of decentralized energy networks from hurricane-prone states in the US, and of independent and backup energy supplies for critical infrastructure. Because urban infrastructure and society are by nature interconnected, urban crises can cascade into looting and the breakdown in the rule of law, and even threaten the legitimacy and stability of governments. This highlights the importance of resilience in social structures as well as physical infrastructure. As well as risks from natural hazards and the strain from the various consequences of unplanned rapid population growth, a host of other threats have developed. The narrative around urban security in the 21st century often focuses on terrorism and cyber threats. Terrorists have targeted urban centres because of their economic and political centrality to the nation-state, as well as the large populations that inhabit them and the resulting media impact. The mixture of population density and urban complexity increases both the physical and psychological effect of an attack. With high-profile terrorist attacks in cities becoming more frequent, certain parts of the world have seen a trend towards the militarization of society, with armies playing a greater role in securing public spaces and events. The radicalization of young people is also reported to be more prevalent in urban centers. The cyber threat, the emergence of smart cities, where increasing integration of cyber technologies and physical infrastructure makes for a more efficient system, has led to a number of benefits, but has also made cities vulnerable to new threats. Cyber criminals, terrorists, and even nation-states may carry out attacks on urban infrastructure to obtain information, extort companies or governments, or wreak economic warfare. Attackers could potentially disrupt the operation of an entire city, which may have nationwide and even global repercussions. This ability to cause large-scale physical disruption, and in some cases even destruction, remotely has led to cyber operations being recognised as a military domain along with land, sea, air and space. But what is truly unique about the 21st century in terms of urban security? The increase in the mobility of people, data and goods, the concentration of people and the centralisation of systems which characterise the 21st century does not necessarily change the risk profile of a city. What it does do is make these events increasingly unpredictable, so the modelling of interactions becomes important for planning assumptions. As I'm at the Defence Seminar, I wanted to talk very briefly about urban violence at its most extreme, namely urban warfare. RUSI held a conference about this earlier in the year entitled Urban Warfare, Past, Present and Future. I'd like to highlight just some of our main findings. Some of the most intense battles in recent years have taken place in cities amongst the civilian population. The conference concluded that common to all instances of urban warfare is the way in which the environments typically draw in vast amounts of human and material resources. A key characteristic of urban warfare that emerged was the way in which boundaries, rules, behaviours and presumptions of what is acceptable in such circumstances are broken and remade. The descent to the lowest levels of warfare techniques and procedures was evident from historical record and contemporary examples in Iraq, Syria, and the Ukraine. Urban warfare is rarely binary, with resistance movements and factions within forces, third parties attempting to mitigate impacts for the common good or to perpetuate the conflict for their own ends. How we choose to wage war in urban areas and how cities can best recover is a pertinent question for now and the future. Does a city cease to exist if the main infrastructure is destroyed? What about the role of community in recovery? Now I'd like to briefly discuss ways forward. In terms of the big picture, passive or spontaneous urbanisation is not a sustainable model. In 2016, the UN adopted the New Urban Agenda, a guideline for urban development for the next 20 years. It highlighted the importance of national urban policies that promoted integrated systems of cities and human settlements, stronger urban governance with sound institutions and mechanisms that empower and include urban stakeholders, reinvigorated long-term and integrated urban and territorial planning and design in order to optimise the spatial dimension of the urban form, effective financing frameworks to create, sustain and share the value generated by sustainable urban development in an inclusive manner. If we look at the national level, multi-hazard risk approach and transdisciplinary working is the way forward. Diversifying capabilities for risk assessment and improving interagency collaboration. Risks are increasingly interconnected, but political and administrative responsibilities are often scattered or siloed. Authorities must become institutionally adaptable. Better data collection, research, and exchange of best practices at the local, regional, and global level. Consider risks in a holistic fashion under the umbrella of precautionary governance. And at the local or community level, most tools are targeted to experts and decision makers, with only a few addressing citizen capabilities. The importance of soft tools, changing social, political, and economic conventions are often as crucial to the success of city resilience as upgrading its physical assets. There is a shift away from centralised state protection to encouraging citizens to also take measures. A shared responsibility between governments, private sector, and members of civil society will become central to the maintenance of urban security and disaster management. Resilience needs to be lived as well as built. I'd just like to finish with a concluding thought that emphasises the importance of urban security in the 21st century by an expert on non-traditional security threats, Vanda Feldbad-Brown. According to her, how urban public safety is handled in the 21st century will determine citizens' perceptions of the accountability and effectiveness of the state in upholding the social contract with its citizens. In other words, urban security strikes directly at the heart of society and the stability of governments and of nation states. And with the world urbanising at an ever-increasing rate, the urban security challenge will be even more relevant tomorrow than it is today. Thank you.